At its June 2018 meeting, the OPTN UNOS Board of Directors adopted principles regarding the role of geography and organ distribution policies to meet the requirements of the OPTN Final Rule. Under the OPTN Final Rule, OPTN organ allocation policies can only be based on a transplant candidate's place of residence or place of listing to the extent required by another factor described in the OPTN Final Rule. The OPTN UNOS Ad Hoc Geography Committee seeks public comment on 3 proposed frameworks for distribution. The frameworks are models that can be applied and studied to ensure that organ allocation policies comply with the principles established by the board and with the requirements of the OPTN Final Rule. The committee seeks input from donation and transplantation professionals and the public on whether and how each proposed framework may be effective in developing and assessing organ distribution policy consistent with the requirements of the OPTN Final Rule. Please share your opinion, as well as any questions you have, about how the proposed frameworks may be used. The committee will consider all public input as it develops its final recommendations for the Board of Directors. This presentation addresses each of the 3 frameworks. Framework 1, fixed distance from donor hospital. Many people are familiar with this framework. We currently use a version of this in the form of concentric circles to distribute hearts and lungs. This framework creates fixed geographic areas based on the distance between the donor hospital and the transplant candidate's hospital. While local matches may receive priority, consistent with the requirements of the OPTN Final Rule and the principles adopted by the OPTN UNOS Board, this approach may also allow wider distribution for other characteristics such as medical urgency. In this example, the donor hospital is located between and relatively close to transplant hospitals B and E. Candidates at hospitals B and E are within the first proximity circle. Candidates at transplant hospitals A, C, and D are in a wider circle. If there are no major differences in urgency between candidates at any of the hospitals, the local candidates at hospitals B or E would appear on a match run before those in the wider circle. But if a candidate at hospital C is considerably sicker than any at hospital B or E, the system could prioritize that candidate ahead of more local candidates. A potential advantage of this framework is that it allows you to consider organ-specific constraints such as travel time. It also extends distribution to a larger area. This means medically urgent patients across a broader area could receive an organ. It is also relatively simple to explain and implement. A potential disadvantage of this framework is that however the distance is determined, it uses fixed boundaries. As a result, 2 candidates who have similar matching characteristics and level of medical urgency may be treated very differently because they fall in different zones, even though they may be just a few miles apart. Also, there are differences in population density from one area of the country to another. This may mean that circles of the same size across the country could result in having a higher or lower number of potential candidates within each of the zones. Framework 2, mathematically optimized boundaries. Mathematical optimization can be used to establish distribution boundaries. The boundaries are based on a statistical formula designed to achieve the best results for one or more specific goals, such as having a consistent ratio of donors to potential recipients within each distribution area. The number and size of distribution boundaries could be scaled up or down to reflect various criteria, such as preferred travel distance or the relative number of potential donors and transplant candidates. They could range from a limited number of large districts to a relatively large number of localized neighborhoods. Their shape could also be customized to account for unique issues, such as proximity to a coastline or to large areas not served by any transplant hospital. Neighborhood boundaries could overlap if the factors used to calculate them share common characteristics. Thus, an individual transplant hospital may be in more than one neighborhood. In this example, transplant hospitals A, B, and D are in one distribution district, with hospitals C and E in a separate district. Using a neighborhood approach, hospitals A and B and E are in common neighborhoods, while hospitals in C and D are in separate neighborhoods. Candidates at Hospital B may thus appear as a local match in either neighborhood it shares with A or E. Potential advantages of mathematical optimization are that it provides consistent results and can be monitored and scaled according to objective criteria. Potential disadvantages of this approach are that, in order to account for differences in population or other characteristics, the boundaries may be complex, and may not be as uniform in some areas of the country as they are in others. Additionally, as with the donor proximity framework, this system establishes a fixed boundary. Thus, it may treat two patients with similar medical needs and characteristics differently when they are local to each other, but are listed at different hospitals that cross a boundary. Framework 3, continuous distribution. Organs can be distributed to candidates using a statistical formula that combines important clinical factors, such as medical urgency and likelihood of graft survival, along with distance from the donor location. Using this approach, all candidates would receive a relative distribution score, but there would be no absolute geographic boundary. Candidates who would receive the highest priority would be those who best meet the combination of factors. For example, they are in urgent need of a transplant, are likely to have a good transplant outcome, and are near the donor location. Candidates who rate highly on some of those criteria, but not others, would have lesser priority. Candidates who are likely too far from the donor location to allow a successful transplant would remain on the match run, but receive the lowest prioritization. In this example, there are no fixed boundaries between transplant hospitals. The donor hospital is closest to hospitals A and B, so candidates at those two hospitals receive some points for proximity, consistent with the requirements of the OPTN final rule and the principles adopted by the OPTN UNOS board. Hospitals A, C, D, and E have candidates who are a close biologic match. Hospitals D and E both have candidates with elevated medical urgency, with Hospital D having the most urgent candidate. When these various factors are combined, a candidate at Hospital D would appear first on the match run. This candidate receives no proximity points, but ranks strongly based on medical urgency and biologic compatibility. The candidate appearing next on the match run is at Hospital A, with a combination of priority for proximity and biologic compatibility. Candidates at the other three hospitals appear lower on the match run according to how strongly they match on the combined factors. Potential advantages to this approach include the fact that without a specific boundary, two patients who are similar to each other in suitability and proximity would be treated much the same way. Also, the model used to calculate priority would consider specific clinical characteristics about the organ and the candidate. This would make it more likely that organ offers would be matched more efficiently with candidates, and that candidates in highest medical need may receive priority, regardless of proximity to the donor hospital. Potential disadvantages are that the formula may not be as easy to explain and understand. It also may not produce matches in a way as predictable to clinicians as other frameworks may be. Please take the opportunity to provide your feedback on these proposed frameworks during the OPTN public comment period, which is scheduled to begin August 3rd and conclude October 3rd. If you plan to attend the regional meeting for your OPTN UNOS region, you will also have the opportunity to discuss the frameworks there. Information about each regional meeting is available on transplantpro.org under the Community section. If you have additional questions or comments, you may send an email to geography@unos.org.